Business Channel. Live on Sky News Business, this is Trading Day.
Hello, this is indeed Trading Day, 2 p.m. in Sydney. Helen Daly with you. Great to have your company. Now, the local market, relatively flat. It is staying above, well above, really, that 5,900 mark, but it is up in positive territory by just 0.1% at 5,917. The gains in utilities really being offset by industrials. Blackmore's hitting a one-year high after the company reported a 28% rise in direct China sales. It is sitting at $149.13 a share. Also, Qantas CEO Alan Joyce confirming the company is on track for a successful year after strong first half earnings, but it warned of tougher conditions in the second half at the airline's first AGM in 3 years. Meanwhile, Macquarie Group shares pretty much at an all-time high after reporting a record 19% rise in first half net profit, driven by improved earnings in asset management and banking operations. Canada's Saputo buying Murray Goulburn for $1.31 billion. The deal to see the milk price increase 40 cents per litre to $5.60 from November 1st. Well, checking in on today's business news, Macquarie Group announced a $1 billion share buyback as it reports a record 19% rise in first half net profit to over $1.25 billion, driven by improved earnings in assets under management and banking operations. Now, net operating income was also higher, up 3.4% to just under $5 billion, while the company flagged a weaker second half. It does expect FY18 will have profit tipped to be slightly higher than FY17. Quite a few management changes announced too, with the bank appointing former RBA Governor Glenn Stevens as an independent non-exec director, naming Alex Harvey as new CFO, with Chief Risk Officer Stephen Allen set to step down at the end of December. Shareholders to receive an interim dividend of $2.05 a share. ResMed net income for the quarter also rising 13% to $86 million. Income from operations for the quarter was $112.6 million. That was up 20%. Expenses were rising, with selling, general and admin costs up 12% and R&D expenses up 9%. The company also paying out a cash div of 35 cents a share. ResMed says its gains are thanks to increased expenditure on new product innovation. Well, now, oil is a very interesting space at the moment. It's showing gains as Saudi Prince Mohammed, he backs the extension of OPEC cuts beyond March 2018, and Russia's president saying he's also open to extending the OPEC cuts. For more on this, Markus Helsing from JB Markets joins us live from Melbourne. Markus, thanks very much for joining us. Now, this the oil story is such an interesting one. Is it becoming sort of the sleeping commodity beast is showing a little bit more life?
I think you worded it beautifully. Now, look, really, I mean, you just put one thing down. I mean, we have an Aramco float coming up next year out of Saudi Arabia. Here's a population of 32, 33 million people, and that is their biggest asset to float. Would you make an absolute extreme effort to make sure this float is going to be a success? Because this is a one-off. So in itself, we know OPEC, the whole oil industry, is your biggest sort of conflicted cartel type scenario. So they can, as we've seen, just withdraw from supply, and they've now extended that to artificially prop up the price. We expect that to be much more the case going forward into next year. We think of the two big macro moves. We have a bit of a perfect storm coming up in oil prices, Aramco float, and the Federal Reserve pulling back from and selling off their massive book they have on bonds. So that to me is all in one, to me, a perfect storm for a takeoff in oil prices.
All right, now was interesting, this Prince Mohammed who's being talked about as much more moderate. He really wants to pull the country into the 21st century, be a more moderate Islam country. But he is really backing this extension of the oil cuts. And, I mean, does that make OPEC sort of much more credible and a much more credible player?
Wouldn't you do the same in the same situation? I don't think they worry too much about credibility, because I think OPEC does not have that much of that anyhow, and they know that. At the end of the day, they are in control of the tap, and they have the biggest float ahead of themselves. The Russians are right in there. Venezuela, who sits on the second biggest reserves in Iraq, they're all behind it. I mean, God, do we know Venezuela needs every dollar they can get. So really, at the end of the day, I think Saudi Arabia is back in charge, and I would say even in control of the oil price to some degree. So really, we feel this oil price will be the dominant story the next 12 months in a very big way, to the point where we could even start thinking about oil prices back at $65, $75 a barrel. We think 55 is the magic line. Once it's broken, make sure you're on it.
But just a minute, Marcus, aren't you getting a little bit ahead of yourself? Did you say 60, 65? I mean, that's a long way from where we are now. And when do you think it will break through that 55 mark?
Well, it might look far away, but as we all do know, in stock markets, things happen on the downside, on the fast, on the lift side. When in commodities, once you see key breaks, the herd mentality takes over, and from 55 to 65, literally can happen in a matter of days. So commodities, when they actually have the underlying fundamentals and technicals to come in, you'll find the herd mentality will take care of it.
Yeah, all right, well, go on.
Now, we think that could actually quite happen over the next few months. I mean, we're actually really bullish. I've got to disclose, we are long Woodside and Santos. We do like the stocks. I'm talking about them for months.
Yeah.
But really, to me, it's technically and fundamentally a great hold. But really, we also long crude oil ourselves. So I've got to disclose that we're talking with our own book as well. But really, it's such a big market, it doesn't really matter the small positions we have.
All right, but it is interesting, because isn't there, you know, the rally in price sort of met a bit of resistance around that 52.50 mark, and yet you're saying it could go through 55?
It just got this sort of a feel to it. If you also actually look at the supply and demand story, which really was the dominant.
What, Marcus?
Supply and demand story. Have a look at the actual storage levels. The storage, the actual increase in storage has flattened off in the US, number one. Number two, supply. I mean, as much as we like to be dependent on wind and solar, we're basically still extremely dependent on oil and coal. Now, this hopefully in 10, 20 years will all change, but not now.
Yeah.
So the supply and demand story has flattened off to the point where we believe demand nearly outstrips supply. It's finally come to that point. And it might be somewhat artificially induced by cutbacks of production and whatnot by the OPEC members and Russia, but nevertheless it works. And that's where we're now.
Yeah, and so you're saying, you know, Santos and Woodside in particular should really be able to capitalise on this.
Absolutely. I mean, I looked at international oil stocks, and quite frankly, I think the potential for Australian stocks such as Woodside and Santos to outperform most international ones, to me, are very, very high.
Yeah. All right, let's move on now. Gold and silver, what is happening to them? Because I guess, you know, I mean, booming stock markets, what does that do? Does it kind of send them to the sidelines?
Well, exactly. I mean, look, I mean, as everyone knows, I do believe everyone should have a big proportion, at least 5 to 10% of the liquid assets in gold and silver, because as good as the times are in the moment, I hope they stay for another 20 years, to be honest. But as we all know, at some point, good times do hit some proverbial brick walls. Look, we really think the extreme low volatility, the total complacency in the market, in the stock market, I mean, obviously puts the gold and silver on the back burner. We feel at these levels and any lower levels, especially if the US dollar bounces a bit more, which we think is very plausible over the next few months, maybe a 5% US dollar bounce to the broad index, that could even depress gold and silver back towards 1,200 in gold and silver back to the $15, $16 level. But really, this is just, in our view, a huge opportunity for adverse thinkers or people who want to start hedging their extreme equity base booked. They should really have some serious think about putting positions in place in precious metals.
Yeah. So can we move on to grains? Now, what are soybeans showing as far as you're concerned, Marcus?
Well, soybeans and wheat are sort of the opponents. They have totally different, incremental fundamentals themselves. Soybean is more like a feed grain, if you like, for your piggeries and whatnot and whatever else. Wheat is obviously one of our main, affects our main diet, etc. So the different individual fundamentals. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, grains are dependent on weather factors, supply and demand factors, and whatnot, like any other commodity. But the weather factor is probably a big one. We're talking all about global warming. We had some of the biggest harvests the last few years. That's why we have the supply and demand scenario depressing these prices. We just feel anyone who is an investor who looks at a broader diversified type of investment plan should now look at grains, not necessarily throw all their life savings at it, but they should look at diversification because they're very, very cheap. They might stay cheap for years to come. We doubt that, but things can always take a bit longer. But really, wheat and soybean, historically speaking, and in terms of inflationary aspects of the last 30 years, are very cheap. And we think they, at some point, will just have the right fundamentals to break up.
All right, Markus Helsing from JB Markets. Thanks so much. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Well, we are standing by, along with all the media, waiting for its ruling, which is expected really within the next 5 minutes. The High Court I'm talking about. It's due to decide whether the 7 politicians embroiled in the dual citizenship cases will remain or be kicked out of Parliament. Are they eligible to be there? 6 senators and the Deputy Prime Minister will be waiting as the full bench of the High Court hands down its ruling. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says he's confident the court will rule in the government's favour and spare his deputy from a by-election which could jeopardise his 1-seat majority.
July the 14th, Greens co-deputy Scott Ludlam made this shocking announcement.
It was brought to my attention that I hold dual citizenship, nationality of Australia and New Zealand.
Section 44 of the Constitution bans dual citizenship holders from being elected, so he resigned. But no one could predict what was to follow. One by one, elected members of Parliament realised they're in the same boat.
I have discovered that I'm a dual citizen and that I'll be forced to stand down from my position in the Senate.
They were born overseas, but the revelation you could inherit a foreign citizenship entangled even more members of Parliament. July the 25th, Resources Minister Matt Canavan stood down from the front bench.
Till last week, I had no suspicion that I could possibly be an Italian citizen.
Just 3 weeks later,
I may be a citizen by descent of New Zealand.
I was a British citizen by descent through my Scottish-born father.
Now the government was in trouble. Barnaby Joyce is the Deputy Prime Minister. He's the leader of the Nationals Party and he holds a number of portfolios. His potential illegitimacy sent the Labor Party blazing.
It is really a contempt of the Constitution.
The House calls on the Prime Minister to immediately stand aside the Deputy Prime Minister from Cabinet until his constitutional qualifications have been determined by the High Court.
Crossbenchers became caught in the crossfire.
I was a citizen of the UK and colonies.
I'm a British overseas citizen.
There were even some false alarms.
Show it or shut up.
Where's the proof? From the UK Home Office.
Social Security number is yours for life. Even if it wastes the High Court's time, I think that's where it'll end up.
August the 24th, the High Court sat for the first time. It set hearing dates, October 10, 11 and 12. During the hearing, the Commonwealth argued Barnaby Joyce, Fiona Nash, Matt Canavan, Nick Xenophon and even Larissa Waters did not know they were dual citizens and should be spared.
We are very, very confident that our members who have been caught up in this will be held by the court to be eligible to sit in the Parliament.
There are a few likely scenarios. The best case, the court accepts the ignorance argument and rules in favour of all members, allowing them to stay in Parliament. The worst case scenario for the government would be losing its coalition members, including Barnaby Joyce. A snap by-election would be called for his seat of New England, and he faces an old nemesis, Tony Windsor. The Greens senators and Nick Xenophon have already resigned, so they'll have to be replaced one way or another. How? the court will decide, but it's likely they'll order a recount of the ballot papers, which means the next person on the relevant party's ticket will take their place. A decision will be handed down today at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, a decision that could spark the beginning of a painful fight to retain government. Jennifer Beshwati, Sky News, Canberra.
Well, that is due any minute now. Literally, it is due now. The court is due to make its ruling, and we have our Sky News reporters there at the scene. But let's check in on how the market is doing. It has just fallen down into negative territory. It's still up over that 5,900 mark, but it's back down 0.04%. Now, this could be the market sort of anticipating the political uncertainty if things are changing there, but we will keep you posted on that. Let's have a look at the best and the worst performers today as we see, you know, there's been a lot of company news around. Blackmores is having a fantastic day. It's up to just under $150 a share. It's up 8.45%. Oricobra, the lithium play, is also having a good day. New Farm, ResMed on some good results there today. They're up just under 5% to $10.65. South 32 also in that best performers group. But if we have a look at the worst performers, St Barbara is in that bottom movers, Asaleo Care, Worley Parsons, Qantas, interestingly, probably on the news that they face a few tougher conditions for the next half. They are also trading down today after having had a stellar run on their share price for several months. Saracen Mineral also rounds out those bottom movers groups. So we're going to check in on some other news as we await for that High Court information, the ruling from the judges in the so-called Citizenship 7 case. Now, dairy deals with Murray Goulburn show that Canada's Saputo, it signed the deal with Murray Goulburn for $1.31 billion to take over the troubled company, with the sale pending shareholder and FIRB approval. The binding agreement will see the milk price increase 40 cents a litre to $5.60 per kilogram from November 1. Now, it should also include supply commitments totalling around $114 million. Part of the sale price needing to be retained by the company, pending ongoing ACCC and ASIC matters, and all associated liabilities. The sale is expected to go through in the first half of 2018. Now, AMP reporting. Okay, we're not going to talk about AMP at the moment. We are going to have a quick break and we'll bring you the latest on the High Court. It's only minutes away, delivering the verdict on the eligibility of 7 MPs and senators. We'll let you know as soon as the decision is handed down.